going on, team? Welcome back to the Fireside PM podcast. I've got a solo episode today. I was in a coaching call maybe a week or two ago, and a senior PM at a venture-backed early stage startup was letting me know that, hey, I'm no longer at insert name of venture-backed startup. I said, oh, tell me more. And they said, well, we didn't have a customer in a long time. We had some users, but no paying customers. And there was just a creative differences that were irreconcilable with the CTO and some of the other leadership team. And I said, oh, yeah, this is not an uncommon story for teams to work on a product that, maybe doing okay, but probably isn't a venture. And it's not because they're not smart. I mean, most products really shouldn't be independent ventures. They should be parts of portfolios of existing companies or features of existing products. You really have to kind of catch lightning in a bottle to justify, the existence of an independent C Corp pursuing this area. Or if you're in an existing company and you're on a 0 to 1 product, but it's not kind of reaching escape velocity and it's been a while, it's quite normal for that project to eventually get shut down. Usually it's not by you, the PM. Usually comes from higher up. But when it happens, none of us are surprised. Which then, begs the question, well, then why didn't we kill it ourselves? One of the reasons why either 0 to 1 projects don't get killed at existing companies or 0 to 1 startups take too long to pivot is that, we PMs are optimistic folks. Many of us are, probably most of us. And we tell ourselves lies. Those lies aren't nefarious. They're not because of any character flaws. In some ways, they're because we want to believe that, no, this thing is just on the cusp of a tipping point, the magical inflection point, the kink in the curve. And rarely does it happen because probably there's a more foundational challenge, which is, turns out we're not solving a big enough problem, or our entire approach is just 20% better than existing solutions or existing workarounds, and that's just not good enough. So let's get into these lies that we tell ourselves, and I'm sure they're going to be familiar to all of you, but sometimes it's good to hear it again in case you're on a project where you may hear some of these quotes come up. The first one is like, we're going to get there, but we just need to ship this one more thing. And once we ship this thing, which maybe even in usability studies, like people said they really loved, the whole product is going to go from not killing it to killing it. Now, if your product is already doing well and you have a new feature that you think is going to do well, then that's great. I'm talking about the situation where the product is plateaued and you're thinking, the 11th feature we launch is really going to do it. If you're in really like, wow, we just launched this MVP of an MVP a few weeks ago, for sure, there are going to be times where you kind of unlock growth through some innovative new feature. I'm talking about the situation where you're like, wow, we've been at this for 6 months, and we're just kind of pounding our heads against the wall, and it becomes like a kind of almost like a Hail Mary, which is like, oh, this 11th feature is really going to do it. And it's hard because it's kind of true. It probably is, a good feature. I'm sure it's not a terrible feature. So it's not like you're saying, oh, this feature's it's inherently terrible, but you're lying to yourself that it's great. It may be a solid feature. The question is that going to give your product that doesn't yet have market fit the activation energy it needs to really have an unfair amount of growth that isn't fueled by paid media or superhuman founder-led marketing or sales. So if you tell yourself, oh, this 11th feature is going to do it, it's probably more a situation where this product doesn't have fit, and adding another feature is kind of poking around the edges, but it's not fundamentally going to change things. Now, if it's like, oh, it's just one more pivot, or it's a new customer type, or we're basically throwing away the entire approach that we use to solve the original premise, and we have a completely new way of attacking this problem, then chances are better. If it's more like, no, this is kind of like refining, extending, adding a little bit of adjacent bells and whistles, then you may get a little bit of action, but it's unlikely going to kind of change the slope of the line. The second lie we tell ourselves is, oh, we are totally onto something because we're the only ones that are solving this customer problem this way. We have a very novel approach where we're using some RAG, or we're using some source of data that historically isn't available, or we have some novel integration, blah blah blah, and no one else does it. And it's tempting because it's that really no one else does do it this way. It's probably not true enough, because sometimes founders and PMs, they kind of focus so much on the moat and being different and having that chart where they compare their product and all the existing ones, and they're like, oh, none of the existing ones do it this way. The truth is, like, the customer doesn't really care that you're the only one that does it that way. The customer wants to know, like, well, does the way you're doing it give me 10x value or 3x ROI versus the alternative? And if the answer is like, well, no, we are 3x or 10x different in terms of our approach, but the actual impact to the user and the customer may be marginal, then you're kind of unique for your own sake. But and you can tell yourself, like, therefore we have a moat. But if you build a moat and there's no gold in the castle, that's like a graveyard. So third lie we tell ourselves, we just need to get the word out. Give me that credit card. Let's fire up paid media. I'm going to hire this agency. I'm going to do this deal with this major influencer that's going to talk about my product, whatever. And once we get that word out, we're going to have explosive growth. And it's kind of true, because the more word you put out, probably the more users you will have. So it is mathematically correct that increasing the top of your funnel should move your bottom line some number in the positive direction. The problem is that that is often a bit of a sugar high where you're kind of putting your thumb on the scale a little bit in terms of driving more action through paid media. And then, yeah, some percentage convert. But the moment you stop that music, all action stops too. And what you really want is you do want your customers and the market to be pulling you. Of course, at some point you're going to want to do paid media to accelerate things, but that's using paid media to augment and accelerating something that's a flywheel that's already spinning. If it's more like, oh, I've got this square wheel and I'm just going to step on the gas to kind of force this thing to turn, and it's like, and it turns, and I step on the gas again, it kind of lurches forward and then stops. Versus like, oh no, this thing's already spinning, we're just going to give it a little more gas and increase the acceleration. So that's lie number 3. Lie number 4, these customers, they just don't get it. They don't realize how amazing my product is. And let me tell you something. If Henry Ford had asked his users what they wanted, they would have told him a faster horse. Therefore, I should ignore the fact that my customers are not buying my product, telling me that they want something different. And at some point, they will all give me a standing ovation and everyone claps. It's more likely if your customers are not signing on the dotted line and creating accounts and pulling out their credit card and using this thing on a repeat basis. It's more likely that, again, you're not solving a big enough problem, or your solution isn't that much different. The last lie is probably the most powerful one, which is that the train has already left the station. Well, I know the product's kind of suboptimal, and this strategy may not really be the strategy, but the SVPs already are convinced that this is the right way to go, or we did a big review process last year and everyone approved this investment, or we just brought in external capital and such and such investment firm, that partner kind of bet on us. And so it's kind of true that sometimes the train is moving fast down these tracks, and it may be kind of heading off a cliff, but it's not easy to kind of pull the brake, and it takes courage. And you may not even get rewarded. You might be accused of being not a team player, or you don't get it. You're like the people asking for a faster horse. You're not a believer. So I don't know why I put a Pulp Fiction quote here for the last one, but you have to be able to speak truth to power. And you have to navigate through the valley of darkness. And that's not easy. But ultimately, if you say nothing and you just go with the flow, and the product really doesn't have fit, and it's been tried 5 different ways till Sunday, and it's still just producing labored growth, where you're really cherry picking numbers to try and tell a exciting story, and your KPIs are changing every month to try and highlight some things that are working well, then it's probably not going to work out in the long run. And it's better to try and help and step up in a leadership capacity to bring alternatives to the team to consider. Now, that's probably the one thing that the naysayers don't do. They're generally pretty good at telling you why the project or the product or the business is not going to do well. But they're not as good proposing alternatives. And so if you're on the other side of that and you are the founder or you're one of the leadership team and you're all invested in strategy one, and then some PM says, I don't believe in strategy one, you've got to be able, that PM needs to say, but I do believe in strategy two. And here's why. And here's how we could validate whether this premise is correct very cheaply. And I would like to volunteer to do that. It's kind of hard to say no. Because if you're in a leadership role and you're looking at the numbers and strategy one is kind of pushing a string, it's not really working. And then someone's like, hey, I got another way, and it's not going to require you to, disrupt the entire business. I can do it really cheap. I would be inclined to say like, well, prove it to me. Show me, get me some people that say they want to, this new approach or this better offering, and get someone to use it, and maybe we'll invest some end cycles to MVP it. So in summary, those are 5 very common sirens that sadly attract a lot of PMs onto rocky shores, and founders as well. And I think probably another reason why this is really hard is because there's counter examples to all of these. Like, I'm sure if you're watching this, you're thinking, well, no, wait a minute. There was a time where I worked on a product or a startup and it really was just one more feature. Or I've been at a startup where we were the only one that did it this way and it was successful. Or I've been a PM of a project where we really just needed to improve the top of the funnel marketing. Or, when I first worked on this startup, nobody thought it made sense and people told us we were crazy, and now everybody does it this way. Or, like, there are plenty of times where it wasn't going well and we had kind of high level air cover, and then eventually like we snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. This is all true. For every one of these 5 things, you're going to be able to think of times where, wait a minute, we were able to kind of do a step change or kind of inflect the curve. What I'm saying is that it's more often that these are things we tell ourselves, and eventually the product needs a much bigger pivot, or the business needs to be completely restructured, or we need to just exit the business and invest in another area. So if it were as easy as like, oh, always pivot, like always give up, like that would be terrible advice. I think the thing you want to think about is, are we at a point where we've kind of turned this Rubik's Cube enough times to know that if we were going to figure it out, we probably should have figured it out by now. We acknowledge that 1 or 2 more turns might really be the thing, but more likely than not, by the 9th or 10th or 12th turn, if you're not seeing major progress, then might be better to just scramble the whole cube and start over and try something else. If you want to get any help in the future on these kinds of discussions, definitely follow me on LinkedIn. These kinds of videos I turn into Substacks, so you can read them if you don't have the 20 minutes to listen to a whole video. I also put it on the Fireside PM podcast, so you can listen to it on your commute. And then I teach live PM master classes on Maven, and also work with a lot of people one-on-one as an executive coach and a PM coach, as well as with teams and companies. So reach out if I can be helpful, but most importantly, good luck out there. If product were easy, anybody would do it. So keep up the great work, keep at it, and make great choices. But main thing is, let's get back to work and